Hi, my name is Andy Van Zant. I'm a professional board game developer, and I'm taking a look at older board game designs through the lens of modern board game development. So it's important to note when we're talking about these games, I'm not trying to present criticisms of the choices that were made, but rather to contrast the way that stuff was done in the past versus what you might do today if you were to design the product for the modern market. Today, I'm taking a look at Conquest of the Fallen Lands by Andre Borrego. This is his company. The game was illustrated and I think graphic designed by Josh Capel, who's a well-known graphic designer. Um, so if we take a look at this packaging, we've got a border which is common for older games. It's interesting that none of the elements are actually anchored to the border. I would probably get rid of that and open up the illustration a little bit. I think the illustration is a little rough, and I would probably want it to be a little bit more detailed, but it does uh, convey what's going on in the game, so I appreciate that. Um, if we take a look at the side of the box, we've got your normal uh, information there, which is good. And then if we look at the back, we've got uh, an illustration of the components. It's not exactly a component shop, but it is totally gets the job done. And we've got a short blurb and some contents here. I have no qualms with the back or the side of the box. So if we open up the box, maybe, uh, we've got a quick reference card and a rules book. This quick reference card is semi-gloss, has regular rules on one side and the advanced rules on the other. My only complaint with this is that it's a 3 to 5 player game and there's only one quick reference card, which means you're passing it around the table, which means it's not doing the quick part of quick reference. I don't think you need to have 5 of them, but having one for each pair of players is good so that they can be in between the two players. Um, so the rule book is pretty concise. There's this part is essentially one big page double-sided, and then there's the advanced rules, which are clearly labeled at the top. I actually don't care for the advanced rules, but that's just personal preference. I think they inject a little bit of randomness into a strategic game, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't include them. I think that some players would appreciate this, and I would still include them. The rulebook itself has a good order of information, has strong diagrams, and is overall very indicative of Josh Capel having done it because he is very good at rulebooks. The only problem with the rulebook is the material it's made out of. It is a matte material. It feels like regular printer paper. And obviously the colors and the printing are very crisp on this. So it's not actual quality issue, it is perceived quality issue. You will pick it up and you will feel it and you'll be like, oh, this feels cheap. And it's an unfair evaluation, but it's still something you have to keep in mind. And that happens several times with this product where it's an unfair evaluation, but it's a change I would make. I would make that probably a semi-gloss rule book. So if we look inside the box, we've got a white insert that's a little bit better than most. It stops stuff from being damaged, which I'll touch on in a moment, and stops box rattle, but also has wells that are the appropriate size for the components. So it's a little bit better than most white inserts. We've got tiles. The tiles have numbers on them, and that's basically all they are is number tiles. But these have good illustrations to convey the theme, and the overall color of the tile gets darker as the number gets higher. Additionally, we've got the 6s and 9s have that clear line underneath. So the graphic design on these is good, and the illustrations convey the theme well. The tiles are a little bit thicker than average. These are 2 mm tiles, whereas most Carcassonne tiles are like 1.5 millimeters. But unfortunately, the back of the tiles has this matte feel to this. Nowadays, having double-sided chipboard, like having stuff on both sides of the chipboard, essentially costs nothing extra. It costs the additional art, but even if this was just plain black and was not this rough texture, there would be a better perception of value. So even though these are nice thick components, the perception of value on them is lower because of the touch of the back. So I would change that if I was to do it today. We've got these, which are essentially resources. There are three different kinds. You acquire several during the game, and then they sit in front of you, and you tap them like mana for Magic to play cards, and they untap at the end of your turn. And these are cardstock, and they are single-sided. Again, I would make these double-sided, and I wouldn't make these cardstock either, because once you get smaller than a certain size, for cardstock stuff, it starts feeling wrong. It feels fiddly, even though it's completely usable. It feels fiddly, and so I would probably make these chipboard instead. Um, and so uh, Another thing you could do instead of doing chipboard is you could make meeples. They do have to have an expended mode, so they would have to have a clear up and down to them, but that would be another path to go. Um, so uh, that's those tokens. We've also got mini-sized cards here, and these are double-sided, uh, and they have clear numbers on them and symbols for what you're doing. If those were meeples instead, you could have these be the shape of the meeples instead of the image, but these are totally fine the way they are. They are a gloss. They are not linen texture. They are used in hand and on the board. So I don't. I'm okay with them not having linen texture. Usually that means that they are a little bit more readable if they have linen texture, but this high gloss coating actually means that these particular ones are less readable. So I would nix that gloss coating, and also it means that when you store this for a really long time, I don't know if you can hear that crunching, but that's because the gloss coating is sticking to itself. So I'm not a fan of the gloss coating on these cards. I like a semi-gloss at most on cards. Um, and I'll actually go back to the cards here in a second. But the other component we've got is these are glass gems. Um, and they are the player colors, and they are to indicate uh, areas that you control. Um, there's so a lot of people look at these and because they are so ubiquitous, they you can buy these in craft stores, in dollar stores, in TJ Maxx, wherever. They are perceived as a common component, uh, but they are more expensive than a lot of things that would serve a similar function in games. Uh, not only more expensive to include, but they also increase the weight of the product significantly. So shipping can be a little bit more expensive if you're actually having to ship these not in a giant container. Um, so I'm not a fan of these. I would probably have done either wooden cubes or very tiny meeples on these to help indicate player color. Um, so these are that's those glass beads. There's also punchboard money tokens, and it's funny the punchboard tokens are much thinner than the actual tiles. So these are 1 millimeter thick, maybe, and again we've got they're completely functional, but we've got a perception of value issue. Uh, and especially since you've got something to compare them to, you've got these other tiles, and you'll feel those coins, and you'll be like, why aren't they the same thickness as the tiles? So perception of value is a big thing in this. Like pretty much my only criticism so far, besides including a couple extra player aid cards and not using a gloss coating, is perception of value stuff. Not actual value, but perception of value stuff. So the last two things I'm going to touch on, I mentioned that this helps protect the components during shipping. That is especially relevant when you've got these heavy glass beads banging around inside the thing. So I wouldn't have these glass beads, but it is nice that this insert helps offset one of the problems with these glass beads. Um, and the other thing is that I told you I'd talk about these cards here a little bit. And so during the game, these cards get put on the tiles and they fit okay in these tiles. That's fine. Um, but there's two problems with that. So one, when you open up the box, you don't immediately say, oh, I can totally see what's going to happen with these cards. I already have an idea. It's called affordance. If this was hexagonal shaped or had some other indicator that this is what's going to happen during the game, that reduces the mental overhead for explaining the game. It doesn't have a lot of mental overhead to begin with, but uh, you could still improve that by having these be maybe hexagonal cards or maybe being chipboard tokens or something other than this. Like I would for sure get rid of this gloss coating, but I would also probably make some other changes to these the way these cards are done. The other big problem with it that's not affordance is table presence, because when you've got a bunch of these on the table, they're all pointing in different directions, and it doesn't look pretty. It looks like you just kind of laid out these tiles and then coated them with cards, and doesn't have a good wow factor to it. So that's Conquest of the Fallen Lands, and the big things that I would change if I were to do it today versus back when it was originally published are almost all perceived value issues. The single-sided tiles, the single-sided resource tokens, um, the thin coins, and the mat rulebook are all perceived value issues. I would also not use glass beads, both because of weight and because of potential damage to things. And I would not have a gloss coating on these cards. And I might make some other changes to the cards, but I would for sure not have that gloss coating. So hope that was interesting to you. Thanks for watching.